You think your voice means anything in my court. Sit down now, Judge Barrett Raines barked like a gavel with teeth as the file cracked against the black lawyer's shoulder until a small voice in the gallery said Granddad, and his robe suddenly felt a size too heavy. The courtroom smelled like dust and coffee and old wood. Attorney Maya Ellis had learned to breathe through it, to keep her voice steady when she felt anger rising like heat through a cracked radiator. She was mid-sentence. Respectfully, Your Honor, the stop was unconstitutional under, when the thick case file whistled through the air and struck her squarely on the shoulder. The smack echoed. A gasp rippled across the gallery. The bailiff twitched. Maya didn't move for a beat. She stared at the folder where it had skidded across the counsel table and come to rest against her notes. Blue tabs she'd placed meticulously had bent backward. A yellow sticky note clung to the edge like a wilted petal. Judge Barrett Raines didn't look stunned. His jaw jutted forward, a pale cliff of impatience above his robe. "Counsel," he said, voice rough, "if you can't stay on point, sit down." The court reporter's fingers froze. The tapping stopped, and the silence landed heavy. Maya felt a flush climb her neck, but her voice arrived calm, the way she'd practiced in the mirror when she was a law student, daring herself to sound older than doubt. "For the record," she said, "the court just threw a file at me." A woman in the back let out a tiny, involuntary lord. The bailiff, a man with a buzz cut and anxious hands, looked at the floor like it had instructions printed on it. Judge Raines blinked, something uncertain passing behind his eyes. He seemed to remember the room. He cleared his throat. "We will proceed," he said, but it lacked the iron he always wore. Maya's client, Darius Wynne, sat at the defense table with his fingers braided so tight his knuckles had gone ashy. He whispered, "You good?" without moving his lips. Maya slid the file back to her stack and kept her shoulders square. "I'm fine," she murmured. She was not fine. "Your Honor," she said, projecting, "I'm making an oral motion to recuse. I'm also moving for a mistrial and an order of protection for counsel." The judge's mouth tightened. "Denied." "You can't deny a motion you haven't heard," Maya said, leaning in just enough to claim space. "And you cannot assault counsel and continue as if nothing happened." Something shifted in the gallery. A small, high voice said, "Daddy?" Every head tilted toward the back. Near the aisle, a man in a gray suit rose halfway from the bench. He had Judge Raines's cheekbones and the same deep-set eyes. Beside him stood a black woman with braids tucked into a neat bun, and between them, holding a purple backpack with one strap, a little girl in a yellow dress. The man raised a hand, apologetic, but the little girl didn't sit. She stared at the bench like she'd climbed a ladder and found her grandfather at the top of it. "Granddad?" she said. It wasn't loud, but it went through the room like a bird hitting glass. Judge Raines's hand stopped on the gavel. He looked into the gallery, really looked as if the light had changed. His gaze dropped to the little girl, and he went still. You could see the recognition land on him, and then the memory of what he'd just done. Maya watched it all, that flicker that turns a person from a mountain into a man in a robe who has to live with himself after 5 o'clock. The bailiff cleared his throat. Order. Maya inhaled and held it. The courthouse clock on the wall ticked, marking a second she could never go back and fix. She knew how this would play, the denial, the shrug, the whispered hallway apologies that never sound on the record. But there was a child here, the judge's granddaughter, if the resemblance said anything, watching a man of power throw a file at a black lawyer for speaking the Constitution aloud. Maya had been 12 when she'd watched her mother cry over a landlord who lost a rent receipt and raised the rent anyway. She had promised her child self she would be the person in the room who knew which line to cite and how to force the record to hear it. She had not trained for a file to hit her like a thrown bone. "Your Honor," she said, "I renew my motion and request an on-the-record explanation for the court's conduct." Judge Raines's jaw worked. He swallowed, eyes flicking again, to the aisle. The man in the gray suit, a son, had moved a hand to his wife's shoulder. The little girl kept looking at the bench, her mouth uncertain, as if trying to remember a line someone had taught her for a school play. Finally she said, small but clear, "We're supposed to be kind." No one breathed. Judge Raines closed his eyes. When he opened them, he did not apologize. He did what power does when cornered. He moved forward as if nothing happened. "Motion denied," he said. The gavel cracked once. "Call your next point, Miss Ellis." Maya felt something inside her stand up taller. "Very well," she said. Point 1. Officers lacked reasonable suspicion for the stop. The bodycam audio captures the lead officer saying, quote, "Let's see what he does when we light him up," end quote. That's not a Terry stop. That's a fishing expedition. The judge leaned back, chin up, trying to recover his altitude. The court reporter began to type again, hesitant at first, then in steady clicks. The bailiff exhaled. The little girl slid onto the bench between her parents, but her eyes didn't leave the bench. Maya argued with precision she could feel in her bones. Her anger was a metronome, keeping time. She laid out the route, the slurred commands, the officer's laugh that had lived in her ears for a month. She took the court through case law like a guided tour. Finally, when the judge looked away, she added, "And finally, Your Honor, even if the court ignores counsel's safety, as it has today, the exclusionary rule does not." "Watch yourself," the judge said, a warning that sounded tired. "I am," Maya said, and didn't lower her eyes. When it was done, the judge announced his ruling in a tone that told you it had been written before she'd stood up. Suppression denied. Trial date kept. He banged the gavel like a lid. Court is adjourned. The room uncoiled. People stood halfway, then all the way, then found they didn't know where to look. The man in gray held his wife's hand. The little girl hugged her purple backpack, and Judge Raines stayed on the bench a second too long, as if his robe had grown heavier in the past hour, as if it were sewn with stones. Maya gathered her papers, slid the bent tabs straight, and took a breath that filled her chest like a vow. Darius touched her elbow. "You okay?" he asked, voice raw. She nodded once. "We're filing today," she said. "Everything." As Maya turned to leave, the little girl's voice floated again from the back, softer, almost to herself. Granddad threw the book. Maya didn't look back at the bench. She didn't need to. She pushed open the swinging gate to the aisle and felt how every eye followed her, how the room had become two rooms, the one where the law lived on paper, and the one where it hit you. In the hallway, the lights were too bright. She dialed her paralegal before her anger could cool into something more fragile. "Eva," she said when the line picked up, "draft a motion to recuse and a complaint to the Judicial Conduct Board. I want affidavits from every person in that gallery. Today." She hung up. The door behind her opened with a soft hush. She didn't turn, but she heard a child's sneakers hesitate on marble, and a man's voice, careful, measured, say, "Maya." She pivoted then. Ethan Raines. She recognized him from the firm newsletter on judicial families she'd once skimmed. Stood a few paces away, hands lifted as if approaching a spooked horse. His wife watched with eyes that had nothing to do with him. The child peeked from behind her mother's skirt. "I'm sorry," Ethan said. "That shouldn't have happened." "Put it on the record," Maya said, and stepped past him. She didn't see Judge Raines in the hallway, but she felt him, like thunder, is walking toward your house, even when the sky looks blue. Chambers smelled different leather, printer toner, a faint aftershave that tried to say restraint. Judge Raines stood by the window with his robe slung open, the tie beneath it a small flag of order he'd repaired in haste. Ethan closed the door behind them, with more care than he'd ever used closing a door as a boy. "You can't come back here," Raines said, but it arrived without heat. His eyes landed on his granddaughter's hand in Ruthie's, then moved to his son, like a man checking where the exits are. "We were invited to observe," said Naomi, Ethan's wife, her voice too level to be anything but controlled. "Civics lesson. Remember?" Ruthie looked around Chambers like it was a museum exhibit about a creature that only survived in institutions. "Is this where you live?" she asked her grandfather. Raines's nostrils flared. "I will not be talked to." "You threw a file at a black woman," Naomi said, not raising her voice. "At my daughter's role model. She knows Miss Ellis's name. She writes pretend motions at the kitchen table and stamps them with a sticker and says, 'So ordered,' in a big voice." Naomi's jaw flexed. "And you threw a file?" Raines's gaze shuddered. The robe hung on him like a weight the fabric couldn't explain. He turned to the window. Outside, the courthouse steps were already sprouting cameras. News knows the difference between rumor and his story you can show at 6. "I enforced order," he said. "You lost it," Ethan answered. "I was there." Ruthie tugged her mother's sleeve. "Mommy?" She took a breath that made her chest rise like she was preparing to read aloud in class. "Granddad, my teacher says we use words. 'Cause throwing is for when you don't have the words yet." The room contracted around that simple logic. Raines blinked. The aftershave smelled louder suddenly, as if it were trying to cover something you'd rather not notice. A light knock at the door. The bailiff slipped in, eyes darting. Judge, the hallway press everywhere, and Miss Ellis filed something fast. Raines's jaw jumped. "I'm aware." "Motion to recuse to preserve on the record," the bailiff said, as if reading slowly from a list. "And a complaint to JCB. Clerk says they're assigning counsel for the hearing. Sir, they also want to know if you intend to apologize." Silence. Naomi watched his face in the beat that followed, and in it she read every dinner table where he'd explained the world like it was a chessboard he'd long since mastered. She felt a cool pity slide along her anger. He didn't know how to apologize. Not where it counted. "Tell them no comment," Raines said. The bailiff nodded and slipped out. The door clicked. Ethan sat, because his legs were shaking in a way he refused to let show like weakness. "I was proud of you," he said to his father, surprised by the truth of it rising through the wreckage. "Even when I didn't agree, I told Ruthie her granddad was a judge because he believed the rules could shelter the small. I have printed photos of you in that robe." "I didn't print this." Raines's attention snagged on the word printed. He pictured photos on a refrigerator, magnets shaped like fruit, holding him up next to a child's drawing. He saw himself diminished to pixels, and then to a story you tell about a man who stumbled when the lights were bright. Naomi folded her arms. "You can resign," she said, like handing him a lifeline that was also a verdict. "You can do that before they take it. You can say the words and sit down so someone fair can stand up." Raines felt heat climb his neck. Pride is a texture. It rasped. "No." "Then you will be made small," Naomi said. Not triumphantly, simply measuring what stones weigh when you drop them. "By people who know the law better than you know your temper." Ruthie stepped toward her grandfather, then hesitant. "Granddad," she said, and when he looked at her, the room rearranged again, like chairs scraping softly on tile. "When I do wrong, I say sorry." She paused, having delivered the full extent of her curriculum. "It helps." He could not make his mouth shape the word. He looked past them all at the window, at the reporters gathering like crows. He felt every year of his life at once. The clerkship where he learned to say counselor like a scalpel. The first day on the bench when the robe felt like armor. The nights he told himself he was fair. He saw Maya Ellis's face when the file hit, the flicker of outrage and disbelief, the refusal to bow. The door opened without a knock this time. "Ms. Ellis," the bailiff announced, voice high, "is requesting to speak with you in the hallway, Judge, to confirm whether you'll be taking up the motion today or setting it for argument." "Tell her to file whatever she wants," Raines said, then heard how petulant it sounded. He modulated. "We'll set it. Tomorrow, 8:00 a.m. "On your own motion?" Naomi asked. "Presiding over your own recusal hearing? That's tidy." When they were gone, Chambers went very quiet. Raines lowered himself into his chair. He ran a palm over the grain of the desk as if it could tell him what to do. Through the wall, faint as a memory, came the murmur of the hallway. Maya's voice carried, clear as a bell cut from steel. "Yes," she was telling a reporter, "I'll be there at 8. And yes, we'll put every fact on the record. That's what the record is for." Tomorrow, 8 a.m., the hallway hummed louder, as if the building had a pulse. He looked at the door. He imagined walking out and letting his voice do the thing it had always done, bend the air. He imagined failing again. Judge Barrett Raines sat alone with the robe loose at his throat and realized he was already being seen, not as a bench, but as a man. And the gallery had expanded far beyond the people on the wooden pews. The gallery was everywhere now. He closed his eyes, and for a brief, unguarded second, he wished someone would tell him the words. By evening, the courthouse steps had become a stage. Microphones bloomed like metal flowers, cameras lifted on shoulders, and the air pressed tight with heat and headlines. Maya stood beneath the carved lintel and spoke once for the record, then stopped feeding the fire. She wasn't here to win the news cycle. She was here to win. Eva met her at the bottom of the stairs with a stack of signatures clipped under a binder clip the size of a trap. "Affidavits from 12 gallery members who saw the throw," she said, breathless. "2 more coming tomorrow." Bailiff wouldn't sign, but he didn't deny. Also, she lowered her voice, "There's phone footage." Maya felt her stomach go cold. "Of the file?" Eva nodded. "Blurred, angles bad. You can hear the smack. You can see your flinch." She winced. "Sorry." "Don't be," Maya said, the words steady before she felt them. The world had always asked black women to be proof and source and interpreter. Today, at least, the camera helped. They crossed to the sidewalk. Darius waited in the shade of a honey locust, hands jammed into the pockets of a suit that wasn't new. He looked older than his 27 years, eyes rimmed in the exhausted red of months of fear. "I saw it," he said. "I mean my cousin sent me the clip. You okay?" Maya lifted a shoulder. "I've been hit worse by better arguments." She regretted the joke as soon as it left, but it worked. His mouth twitched. "We file for the hearing at 8. Another judge will take it. That gives us 14 hours. "I can't sleep anyway," Darius said. "Then help," Maya said, handing him a to-do list. "Witnesses to the stop. We need their names confirmed, numbers for court notice. Eva will coach them on affidavits. We keep the focus where it belongs, your case." They moved like a small, practiced machine. Back at the office, fans clicked in the corners, and the copier hummed. A poster over the kitchenette read, "We belong in every room where decisions are made." Someone had crossed out "we" and written "I" in careful pen. On a whiteboard, Raines' recusal elements, with bullet points that steadied Maya's pulse, bias, or appearance thereof. Conduct reflecting lack of impartiality. Safety of counsel. Her phone vibrated. Unknown number, local exchange. For a breath, she thought of hang-up threats, the kind that come with invisible saliva. She answered anyway. "Ms. Ellis?" The voice was careful, practiced around judges and bad news. "This is Judge Lorraine Kincaid. Admin assigned me your recusal motion. I'm calling to advise we'll hear argument at 8 sharp in courtroom 6B. I've directed the clerk to arrange security and limit media in the well." "And Miss Ellis?" "Yes, Your Honor." A pause. "Bring what you need to make a record." "The whole record." "Thank you," Maya said, and after the line went dead, let herself exhale long enough to feel the weight of someone older making room. She drafted through dinner. Words found their lanes. The code of judicial conduct read like a promise finally doing its job. She set out the facts without embroidery, clipped each citation like a stitch. Ava brewed coffee that could remove paint. At midnight, the office emptied to a hush that felt like the inside of a seashell noisy with the day rolling back. Maya texted her mother 3 words, "Long day safe." Then she stared at the cursor on her closing paragraph until it stopped being a blink and became a heartbeat. She wrote, "This motion is not a request for apology. It is a petition for safety and the preservation of impartial justice. The court's robe can absorb many things. It cannot absorb thrown objects." She saved, printed, tabbed. When her eyes blurred, she walked to the window. The city was a dim grid, windows lit like small, stubborn vows. Somewhere on a quiet street, a child in a yellow dress slept, knowing just enough to be right. We use words. Her phone chimed again. A text from an unknown number. No, not unknown. She recognized the digits now from a biography she'd read when a judge she never expected to matter to her had seemed like a landmark in the news. Ethan Raines. "I know this is inappropriate," the message read, "but I don't want to be a bystander in my own life. If you need a witness to demeanor and aftermath, I will state what I saw. I can't testify against my father. I can testify for the truth." Maya read it twice, 3 times, feeling the complicated knot of pity and rage shift in her chest. She didn't respond. Not yet. By 2 a.m. the building felt like breath held. Maya stretched her spine until it cracked and went home to shower the courthouse off her skin. The bruise blooming at her shoulder would be yellow in 2 days, a watercolor she hadn't asked to wear. She pressed a cold pack to it and watched the ceiling fan waltz. Sleep came in small pieces and ran away before she could name it. At 7, the sky was a pale sheet. She arrived at the courthouse with a garment bag of fact and law and the conviction that desire alone had never moved anything. But desire plus paper plus voice could shift a room. Outside 6B, a cluster had formed. She saw Naomi's braids first, the neat bun carrying a message, then Ruthie's yellow dress peeking from behind her mother's legs like a lemon slice behind glass. Ethan stood straight, jaw set in a way that made his resemblance to his father sharper and also kinder. Maya nodded to them and went in. Judge Kincaid's bench sat high, but without theater. She wore her robe like a tool, not a costume. She glanced over rimless glasses and said, "Counsel, when you're ready." Maya stood. The words arranged themselves. "May it please the court," she began, and found it did. A little. She laid out the facts. She didn't name the color of her client's fear, because the law preferred its facts cut square, but she made sure the shape of it sat there anyway, unavoidable. She described the arc of the file, the sound it made, the way the room had paused while power decided whether or not to perform decency. The court listened. The court typed. The court typed. The court did not look away. Across the aisle, Barrett Raines sat without the bench to make him tall. He wore a dark suit that fit like memory and a look that tried to translate regret into defense. His counsel rose to speak, a woman with a silver streak like a lightning bolt. "It was an unfortunate lapse," she said, concise. "It was not evidence of racial animus or ongoing bias." Maya felt heat climb. "Opposing counsel does not have standing to define the violence done to counsel's body," she said, steady but sharp. "Intent is the refuge of the comfortable. Impact is the law's concern." Judge Kincaid held up a palm. "We will hear argument. We will do so without talking over one another." Ruthie squirmed in her seat. Naomi pressed a hand to her shoulder. Ethan watched his father the way you watch a bridge you have to cross that has begun to tremble. When it came time for witness statements, the clerk called names. A woman from the 3rd row testified in a voice that shook. A law student from the aisle spoke with the clear diction of someone who'd practiced in the mirror. The bailiff admitted the throw and nothing else, eyes sliding to Raines, once like a skiff brushing a dock, then away. "Miss Ellis," Judge Kincaid said finally, "anything further?" Maya looked at the bruise she couldn't show without theatrics, then at the bench. "Only this. The robe is not a shield from consequence. It is a promise to bear it first. The judge nodded once, small like a seal affixed. We'll recess. Ruling at noon. Outside, the hallway filled with whispers. The flood had reached this floor now, news bright and noisy. Maya stepped aside to breathe. Naomi moved toward her with the precise step of a woman who always knows where her feet are. "My daughter thinks you're a superhero," she said, not smiling. "She's not wrong." Maya allowed herself a half-smile that tasted like tin. "Today I'm a paper mill." Naomi's gaze softened. "Paper can cut." At the end of the corridor, Barrett stood alone, hands open like a man reminding himself not to clench. Ethan approached, a careful gravity between them. "Dad," he said quietly, "whatever happens at noon, do the part you can control. Say the words." Barrett didn't answer. He looked at the sealed courtroom doors like a chapel that wouldn't let him back in. Noon came with the dull clang of the courthouse clock and the bright glare of 100 eyes. Courtroom 6B filled faster than its pews could hold. Reporters took notes with the greed of people who sell moments. Law clerks watched with the anxiety of people who will one day be asked to explain this to resumes. Judge Kincaid returned to the bench with a file so thin it seemed like a dare to anyone who thought weight equaled worth. She looked down at the parties and said, "On the record." The room stilled, a held breath cooling into attention. "This court has reviewed the motion, heard testimony, and taken judicial notice of the audio recording evidencing the incident." She paused, letting the phrase "evidencing the incident" hang like a curtain labeling what everyone had seen. "We find that Judge Barrett Raines' conduct, throwing a case file at counsel during argument, creates at minimum the appearance of bias and, more critically, undermines the safety and dignity of the adversarial process." Somewhere in the gallery someone exhaled loud enough to sound like a sob wrapped in relief. "Accordingly," Judge Kincaid continued, "the motion to recuse is granted. All matters pending before Judge Raines, in which Ms. Ellis appears, are reassigned. The court further refers this matter to the Judicial Conduct Board for investigation and recommends the immediate issuance of an interim protective order barring direct contact between Judge Raines and Ms. Ellis outside formal proceedings." Maya felt the words land like stones across a river step, and then a plank laid down at the far bank. "We made it across." She kept her face neutral and her hands still. She had learned a long time ago that triumph could look like hunger if you let it. Judge Kincaid wasn't finished. "One more point," she said, voice flattening into steel. "Our courts are not theaters for the venting of temper. They are rooms where the state kneels to its own rules. Anyone who cannot hold that line regardless of title will be made to sit." She rapped the gavel once, then softened, turning toward Maya. "Ms. Ellis, you may coordinate with the clerk for scheduling in the Wynne matter. This court expects expedience." "Thank you, Your Honor," Maya said, each syllable clipped and clean. Barrett Raines stood very slowly, as if gravity had changed mid-ruling. His counsel touched his elbow, a humanizing gesture that almost undid Maya. Almost. He didn't look at her. He looked through the crowded room for a face he would recognize as his. Ethan's. He found his son near the back, posture a translation of pride into concern. Ruthie had risen without meaning to. Naomi guided her back down. The little girl's lower lip was bit white. "What happened?" She whispered. "The rules did their job," Naomi said, and for the first time that day, her throat tightened. Outside the courtroom, the sound stormed in questions hurled without malice, but without permission. "Miss Ellis, do you see this as a victory for black attorneys? Judge Raines, will you apologize? To those who say this was blown out of proportion. Miss Ellis, has this happened to you before? Judge Raines, are you considering resignation?" Maya didn't stop for the microphones. She spoke standing still. "This is not about my feelings," she said, measured. "It's about function. I'm grateful to a court that listened. Now I have a client who needs his case tried on the law. Will you accept an apology?" someone shouted. Maya could feel cameras angling for a shot that would later be captioned forgiveness or fury. She chose neither. "I will accept accountability," she said. "Apology is optional." Barrett stood at the edge of the mob, like a man looking at a rip current and calculating the swim. He turned away from the cameras and toward his family because there are only so many choices one can make in a day and still recognize oneself at dusk. Ethan met him halfway. "Dad." Barrett tried, for a moment, to be a judge in this space where he was only a man. "I'll attend the board hearing," he said to his son as if to the clerk. "I'll answer their questions." "That's procedure," Ethan said. "I'm asking about conscience." Barrett's mouth opened, closed. He had always been articulate. It had been his alibi and his armor, but the word he needed had rusted for lack of use. He began, and then stopped. "Say it to her," Naomi said gently, materializing at Ethan's side like a verdict you can live with. "Not to us, not to the cameras. To her." Barrett looked through the knot of press to where Maya stood with Eva, conferring in that rapid shorthand of colleagues. He saw the purple bruise shadowing her shoulder under the jacket. He saw the way she kept her body still as a way of not giving him anything that looked like victory or fear. He took one step, then another. "Miss Ellis," he said. She turned. The hallway dimmed for him the way it does when you're walking toward a person who deserves something you are not sure you can give. "I'm told you want accountability," he said. He swallowed. "I can offer apology." Maya lifted her chin a fraction. "Try." He looked at her without the bench to raise his eyes and found his own reflection unkind in hers. "I did a thing I cannot justify. I did it because I believed my authority was a substitute for patience. I threw an object at you because you argued the law. I am sorry." He forced himself not to add anything that would split the sentences back with excuses. "I am sorry," he said again, because repetition was how one learns. Maya didn't rescue him. She waited. "I hear your words," she said. "I will judge your choices." He nodded once. The board hearing would be set within days. He had time to construct a statement, to consult with counsel, to assemble the old scaffolding of reason. What he had less time for, he now saw, was the work of unlearning. That evening the board issued a notice. An expedited inquiry, public censure under consideration, potential suspension pending outcome. Another notice pinged his email later, softer but heavier. An editorial from the Bar Association's Black Caucus thanking Ms. Ellis and expressing concern for the climate. Black attorneys navigated daily in rooms that called themselves neutral. Barrett poured himself water and watched the glass sweat on his desk. He had the impulse to reach for aftershave, as if neatness could fix what had been thrown. In the corner of his office, his robe hung on a hook like a quiet witness. He sat and began a letter not to the board, not to the press, to Ruthie. He wrote about gravity and rooms and what power owes kindness. He crossed out the parts that sounded like speeches. He left the ones that sounded like a grandfather learning a new word and trying it in his mouth without spitting it out. He didn't sleep early or well. He set an alarm for a time that would let him avoid cameras at the garage. He practiced saying "I'm sorry" into the empty, as if the room could hold him to it. Across town, Maya read motions until the lines blurred, then closed her eyes and saw the gavel on Judge Kincaid's bench, small, purposeful, used once and exactly. She thought of her mother's hands on a kitchen table, round and clever. She thought of the girl in yellow. She thought, "Tomorrow we argue suppression again, and this time the law will hear me without ducking." The board's conference room looked like 1,000 other official rooms seal on the wall. Carpet that punished high heels, water pitchers like props in a play about civility. 5 members sat at the long table, faces arranged into neutral. Barrett took a seat at the end, his counsel beside him like a compass that could point north but not walk. "Judge Raines," the chair began, "thank you for appearing. We'll ask questions about the incident on," he consulted a list, yesterday's date. "Please answer succinctly." They asked about the arc of the file as if measuring velocity would measure intent. They asked about stressors and docket load and whether counsel's tone could have been perceived as disrespectful. Barrett answered, the old cadence surfacing despite himself. "No stressor justifies," he said, and meant it. Counsel's tone was professional. My conduct was not. They asked if he would submit to remedial training. They asked if he would accept a suspension. They asked if he would consider resignation. The word lay on the table like a blade. He had thought all night about the options. He had listed consequences like groceries. He had balanced pride against profession, a math that still resisted solution. Now, under the fluorescent glare that made everyone look like an outline of themselves, he tried to find the path that didn't center his comfort. "I will submit to the board's recommendation," he said, "and I have begun drafting a resignation." Counsel's head turned. Startled, he had signaled openness, not commitment. Barrett kept going. "I have worn the robe a long time. I forgot it was not me. If my staying makes the room smaller for others, I should sit down." The chair did not react, but something passed around the table approval, perhaps, or the simple relief of a problem that might not require a full morning's wrangling. "We'll issue our findings within 10 days, he said. "In the interim, your docket is covered." "Understood," Barrett said. He felt the floor steady in a new way, not the steadiness of power, but the steadiness of consequences accepted. He left by the side exit, avoiding reporters with a sheepishness that surprised him. He had once thought himself brave because he could say the hard thing from a high seat. Now bravery looked like saying it low. He went not to Chambers, but to a small cafe 2 blocks away that didn't know his face except as a regular who tipped and read biographies. He sent a text to Ethan. "Board done? Come if you can." He added a second. "Bring Ruthie, school is." He almost wrote, "if school is flexible," and stopped. "Ring Ruthie if it's appropriate," he typed. He was learning. They arrived 20 minutes later, breathless from trotting the last block. Ruthie wore a denim jacket over a T-shirt with a cartoon book stack. She looked at her grandfather with the cautious optimism of a child who has learned that adults sometimes do better on the second try. Barrett cleared his throat. "I'm stepping down," he said, bypassing the script of preface. "I'll make it public when the board finishes its process, but I wanted you to hear it first. And I wanted you to know," he added to Ruthie, "that you were right. We use words." Ruthie's eyes went shiny and then dry again, like dew in fast sun. "Okay," she said, which in the language of 8-year-olds can mean I have rearranged my interior furniture to fit this fact. Ethan nodded, relief folding his shoulders down. "Thank you," he said simply. Naomi reached for Barrett's hand and squeezed it once, not as absolution but as acknowledgment. Choices had weight. He had lifted one. Across town, Maya stood before a different bench in a room that smelled a little like lemons. Judge Kincaid had reassigned Wynne v. State to Judge Alvarez, a woman whose precise questions made defense attorneys both sweat and believe. "Ms. Ellis," she said, "you may continue your suppression argument." Maya's voice didn't need to climb now. The law was listening. She pointed to the bodycam transcript, the light him up that sparkled like a match held to the Constitution. She set out the map of the stop. No articulable suspicion, a laugh, a search backpack, tossed like litter. The prosecutor shifted. He was younger than Maya and wore the look of a man who would someday be fairer or worse, depending on who won the argument in his chest. "Your Honor," he said, "even if the stop was questionable, the discovery of contraband was inevitable under." "No," Judge Alvarez said, a syllable that fell like the right tool on a stripped screw. "It was not inevitable. It was orchestrated. Motion to suppress is granted." Nereus let out a sound Maya had heard only in rooms where relief untorqued bone. He gripped the edge of the table as if the wood might run away with his luck. Maya felt her own breath land. This was why she'd endured the throw. The bruise was ugly, but the law could still be beautiful. In the hall, the press waited for more. Maya bypassed them again and found the quiet of a stairwell that smelled faintly of bleach and old rain. Her phone buzzed. A message from an email address she recognized, -barrett.r at subject. No subject, Miss Ellis, I will not ask for your forgiveness. I will instead state what I intend to do and do it. I have informed the board I will resign. I will make a public statement that names what I did without varnish. I have also asked the court administrators to allocate funds I raised last term for judicial conferences to be redirected to mentorship and safety training for attorneys who are statistically most at risk in our rooms. If this is performative, I apologize for the optics. If it is useful, I ask only that it be used. Respectfully, Barrett Raines Maya read it twice, thumbs hovering over the keyboard like dragonflies. She typed a reply and then erased it. She typed again. Judge Raines, accountability is a verb. Keep doing it. M. Ellis. She hit send and let the stairwell cradle the silence. That evening, the clip of Judge Alvarez's ruling trended lower than the throw, but high enough that law students texted it to their mothers. Darius went home to his grandmother's stew in the kind of sleep that doesn't bargain. Eva left the office early and bought herself flowers, because no one teaches paralegals how to celebrate. Maya walked past a storefront that reflected her back with the bruise hidden and thought, tomorrow, ordinary work. She loved ordinary work more than victories. The day the board's findings went public, the courthouse felt like a bell struck clean. A censure issued formal, stern, written in the old legal dialect that never apologized for its commas. It documented the throw, the risk to counsel, the corrosion of public trust. It also recorded the mitigation, Raines's admission, his cooperation, his stated intention to resign. Accountability set to type. Barrett read it alone in chambers that were no longer his. He had returned only to clear out books and a photograph that could now go on a home desk like any man's memento. The robe lay on the chair, neat as a folded flag. He placed an envelope on the desk addressed to whoever came next, carrying a note that said, in handwriting that surprised him with its tremor, "You will be tempted to think the room needs your certainty more than your patience. It does not." He took one last look at the window where he had once watched the city like something he owned. Then he left the key on the credenza and walked out not as a judge but as a man who knew where the exits were and chose one. On the steps, microphones woke. He didn't dodge them. He didn't seek them. He stood in the spot where 100 denials had been given and said words he had rehearsed without decoration. I threw a file at an attorney. My conduct endangered counsel and insulted the court I swore to serve. I accept the board's censure. I have tendered my resignation effective immediately. I am sorry, a reporter shouted. Do you believe race played a role? He did not run to the safety of ignorance. I believe the world taught me to feel challenged by certain bodies in certain rooms. I failed to unlearn that fully. That failure had a target. I will spend the rest of my life saying it and correcting it. Another called, Do you hope for forgiveness? I hope for better rooms, he said, and stepped away so that other voices could take the microphone. Inside in courtroom 4C, the Wynn case returned for the post-suppression status. The prosecutor, looking appropriately chastened, announced the state would move to dismiss in the interest of justice. We don't have admissible evidence sufficient to proceed, he said, and the formal phrasing, for once, sounded like mercy with a bar card. Judge Alvarez granted her gavel a page turn. Darius sat very still for 3 seconds, then stood like a puppet reanimated. He turned to Maya with eyes that didn't know how to say gratitude without crying. Thank you, he managed, the words small under how much they held. You did the hard part, Maya said. You lived it. After court, the hallway felt different. People nodded to Maya with that particular hush reserved for someone who has done something dangerous and also ordinary. Naomi and Ethan approached, Ruthie bouncing at the end of her arm like a helium balloon with opinions. We wanted to say congratulations, Naomi said, and also thank you. Ethan's gaze was clear. He did what you asked, he said. Accountability. It doesn't fix yesterday, but it might make tomorrow less sharp. Ruthie thrust a folded paper into Maya's hand. I drew you, she announced. The drawing was a startling composition of crayon and moral clarity. Maya at a lectern, a tiny speech bubble, reading words, not throws. In the gallery, stick figures of many colors. On the bench, a robe with a big heart where the chest would be. I put a heart so the next judge remembers, she explained. Maya swallowed a laugh that would have turned into a sob. I'll keep it, she said, on my wall. They parted in the bright noise of victory that didn't need confetti. Maya went back to her office. She tacked Ruthie's drawing above the whiteboard, crooked and perfect. She opened a new document. Motion in the mine, unrelated case, ordinary work that still saved lives between its lines. Her phone lit. An email from the court administrator approving the reallocation Barrett had requested. A mentorship fund. A mandatory training module on bias and safety, written by a panel that included black women who could name the micro in microaggression and also the macro when it threw. A series of brown bag sessions titled Gallery, open to anyone who wore a robe and needed to be reminded who was watching. She forwarded the email to Eva with a note. Let's propose curriculum, and to the Bar Association with a bolder one. We're available to teach. She added a line to Ethan. The funds were approved. Tell her her drawing already worked. He replied with a photo of Ruthie at the kitchen table, pencil poised like a gavel. At dusk, Maya walked past the courthouse again, not because she needed to, but because rituals are sometimes the only prayers lawyers have. The stone steps looked the same. The lintel cast the same shadow. The difference was not in the building. It was in the record the building held. On a bench under a copper beech, Barrett sat with a paperback in his hands and the expression of a man learning how to be in public without being the room. He saw Maya only when she was 10 feet away. He stood old habit and then sat back down when she lifted a palm that said, "Don't." "I got your email," he said. "I know," she answered. "I read the letter to your successor. Good sentence." "Thank you," he said, and then, to his own surprise, did not reach for a justification to staple onto the thanks. "How's your client?" "Free," she said, letting the word stretch, delicate and loud. They sat in an easy, strange silence that did not require reconciliation to be a kind of peace. Near them, 2 young public defenders argued a point of law as if the park were a seminar. A man in a janitor's uniform read a sports section like scripture. A little girl in a yellow dress chased a pigeon that refused to be caught. Barrett watched the pigeon lift and made a choice he hadn't known he could make until now. "If you ever need an old man to carry boxes for a clinic," he said, "my Thursday's just improved." Maya turned her head and considered him with the earned skepticism of a woman who knew charity could carry poison, and that sometimes people could be exactly as simple as the help they offered. "Boxes are heavy," she said. "I lift," he replied, dry. She nodded once. "We'll see." When she rose to go, he did not ask for anything more. He watched her walk back toward the work that would blessedly never be finished. He looked up at the courthouse. It glowed in the setting light, not absolved but documented. On Maya's desk, the drawing curled at the corners. The words above the stick-figure lectern caught the last of the sun and seemed to glow. Words, not throws. She picked up a pen and wrote beneath it in neat print, "The record remembers." And in the rooms where the law kneels to its own rules, and in the halls, and on the steps, and in the galleries, too, the people who had watched and been hit and kept speaking felt, for once, the weight shift toward their side of the scale. Not forever, not enough, but measurably on paper, in voices, in the doing. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new judges, new rooms that needed to be reminded who they were. Maya set her alarm not for a fight, but for a function. She turned off the office light and left the drawing to keep watch. The city held its breath and then let it go.